Silent prayer is a privilege.
Okay, y'all.
Y'all. Don't think.
It sounds like
Yeah, okay, but it's just a different word.
I get the fancy liberal grammar.
Well, Allison, it's been an aesthetic experience.
I think what we'll do is this, is let me just talk about the virtues, and then let's just see if we can't have some discussion until it's time to go, which would be a lot nicer if we can build it in. I didn't really think of how I can do it on this one, but we'll get there. So I'm going to skip over conscience and the errors of it, only because it's going to be dealt with more substantially next session. So that's something that we could probably just weed out right now. And when it does talk right before that about the temptations of sin, I don't think you really need to elaborate on the fact that it moves from suggestion to complacency to consent. I think we get that. If the only thing I want to comment on that is that when we talk about suggestion and complacency, we're not talking about sin at that point. We're talking about allowing ourselves to be in a situation where the sin's going to be more easy to come to fruition. So when we talk about suggestion, it's not a sin, it's just, it's being presented to us as a temptation, right? And complacency, we're in the near occasion of sin, but that's not a sin in itself. But that should be the red flag. It's time to, retreat if you're not strong enough. This is where, and humility is really the virtue here. Humility is not that false, self, deprecating understanding of your person. It's an actual awareness of who you are, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. And if this is your weakness, there's nothing wrong with admitting that. I can't be around those people. I won't be able to, to handle it. And then eventually, when we get into consent, we've abandoned it. Now we're in, which is why this is a moral act. I mean, this is, we're really participating in this. So there's nothing wrong with just getting yourself away from where the temptation lies. It's the first stage. We're going to talk about virtues here. Virtues and vices are habits. And we can build habits that are good, and we can build habits that are bad. So breaking it, we feel guilty in the beginning, right? We almost feel like it's a weakness. You could think in terms of, say, like people who have a alcohol struggle with dependency or such. In the beginning, just get all away from it. You're just building up the resistance until you start to be able to have enough inner strength where no longer is that the temptation it was. But even then, you still, in humility, recognize your weakness. And you don't put yourself in, whereas if you struggle with alcohol, you don't go out to eat with a bunch of friends who are all drinking. Just not in the beginning until you can build that up. So I think we get that. And again, the errors of conscience we'll deal with later. Okay, so the last thing that we're really going to talk about tonight are the virtues. We have the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. They're usually in that order, but I put it in charity, faith, and hope. And then the four cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, temperance. Prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Okay. Now, when we talk about love, charity, we're talking about a radical emptying of ourselves for the other person. You know what? I bet you I did it again. Oh, I am on this time, aren't I? Oh, very good. And it went the whole other time without even having it on. Fortunately, I caught it here. Okay, so we're talking about a radical emptying of ourselves. We have to think in terms that God sustains us with his love. We always separate everything because we like to analyze things. Even now, when we start talking about these virtues separately, we can't have the false impression that, we live them out, distinct from each other. They're very interrelated and interdependent. We'll say prudence is nothing without love, right? And then we'll say prudence is the mother of all virtues. So they're very interrelated. But anyway, love is a concrete act. It's something that, again, it's a mystery. It's never totally achievable. We struggle sometimes as Catholic Christians when we talk in terms of our own salvation. Like we might be in a discussion with somebody who's much more comfortable saying, I've been justified, I've been saved. That's sort of a foreign language to us as Catholics, because it would almost be like in a relationship, would you say we've achieved love? We would never talk like that. So we don't really like talking like, well, I achieve salvation. It's an odd understanding of how we're being drawn into the other person. So when we talk about this radical understanding of love, we can use Thomas's definition, to will the good for the other. But we really have to use this as the example. The crucifix. I mean, it really is the only icon that we have that we can fully say is a total given of one person to the other. Which is what makes relationships so difficult, regardless of what our vocation is in life. It's, in being married myself, it's tiring and it's difficult, and it should be. It's easy to be selfish. And it's like that with everything. It's easy to be selfish in our own relationships, with co-workers, with our children. It gets tiring. And again, why, I always want to fall back on how we have to live radical lives. Why are we not radically giving ourselves to other people, even in love? It's out of fear. I don't want to be taken advantage of. People will make fun of me. People will think I've been duped. Or who knows, maybe they're going to get ahead of me. It's just a mechanism they're using to one-up me. We're always this fear because we keep forgetting that, we're supernaturally oriented. It's not really about this, and we always want, I always want vindication, I want to be vindicated. I want people to recognize the situation, and I want them to recognize that there's a wrong going on here. Well, sometimes reconciliation is all we get. Let's just reconcile the person with vindications outside of our abilities. It's not something that we can control. And we grumble, I know I do. Well, it's an injustice. And we mumble and we become bitter. And it's difficult. We have to catch ourselves all the time. And again, this is Satan's great ways of doing it. When I do marriage prep, I tell them that, and this is true for all our relationships, is why I bring it up now, we are not each other's enemy. Satan's our enemy. Demons are the enemy. And oftentimes, Satan's in the corner with the Staples Easy button. And with a husband and wife, all he has to do is make the wife think that she's being taken advantage of by the husband. And in any relationship, what I have to do is think that one person's being used by another, and all of a sudden we're at each other's throats, and he's over there hitting that easy button going, well, that was easy. And, and it takes time to intellectually know this is one thing, and we need to intellectually know it, but it takes time for me to stop back and say, no, you're not going to win. I'm not going to allow it. Oh, you're going to look like a fool. Yeah, well, maybe that's my only good part, It's the one thing that we can do quite easy. So nonetheless, love is the greatest of all things. It's the one thing that will never go away, okay? Which is why they say in heaven, and these theological virtues can be found, in Scripture, even in that, with those three. And I'm not sure if I have written anything down. No, probably not, but I know I had it somewhere, just talking about how they refer to God and they're given to us by His grace. Okay, so faith now. Faith is not the same thing as believing. Faith is the total adherence to the revelation as it's been given to us. Okay, the truths of God as it's been revealed to us. So belief is a part of faith. Okay, so you have to believe. But if you want a distinction, belief is knowing it, faith is acting on it. Okay, so just like charity, you can make an act of love, so too you can make an act of faith. It requires something of us. It's certainly the material object of it is truth, because it's based in that. But there are gifts that perfect it. So when we talk about the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which didn't look ahead if they're covered here, but wisdom, understanding, counsel, knowledge, piety, fortitude, fear of the Lord, we can say that wisdom, understanding, and knowledge are certainly gifts that perfect faith. So and if we want to see, here's a way that it works for me in my own spirituality. If you know what the gifts are, and you know what their opposites are, a lot of times for us it's easy to identify what's happening when we recognize the opposite. So with wisdom, the opposite is foolishness. We always heard that phrase, 'tis folly to be wise, but it's half of the phrase. The other part is then, how was it? No, I'm sorry, I really got that wrong. I gave you the wrong part first. It's like telling a joke backwards. Ignorance is bliss, then 'tis folly to be wise. All right? So we want to be brought from the state of foolishness to wisdom. The opposite of understanding is this dullness of mind. I don't quite get it. And the opposite of understanding would be, let's see, understanding. I could do this if I work a different way, but this is, okay. It's dullness of mind, opposite of knowledge is ignorance. So we're brought from ignorance into knowledge. We're brought from foolishness into wisdom. And then we are brought from dullness of mind into understanding. So so we can look at what struggles do we have with our faith? Do we not understand it correctly? Are there parts of it that are hard for us to accept? Which is usually the case, because if you have a deep faith, it requires you to act differently. It's something that penetrates us a little bit deeper. Hope. The last of the theological virtues is a desire for God in the kingdom of heaven, but I think you can understand as a firm expectation in a future possible good, okay? So when we talk as Catholics that we have hope in our salvation, it's not a sense that, we hope in the sense of a wish. We have a firm expectation in this, but we distinguish it from being a wish. We also have to look at the vices that are contrary to it. We can look at, on one side, we can have despair. In other words, there is no hope. This is where we're talking about the excesses on each end. So, on the other half of this, we could also have presumption. Well, of course, God will save me. I've not done anything that bad. Or we always would judge ourselves according to the person next to us. I'm not as bad as him. So, I'm sure I'll go to heaven. So, both these really work against this virtue of hope. Which is why we understand our salvation to be something ongoing and unfolding before us, rather than a finished thing that's already been achieved. We would actually understand that to be the sin of presumption. And we don't go the other way to say, well, there's no hope for me. We understand that, yes, this is a good, but it's achievable. These three things are with God, but obviously once we get to heaven, we have this faith. There's no longer something unseen. It's before us. And the hope has been achieved. The future possible good is now our reality. So it's not that these things really, don't have a place. It's that they have fulfilled their object, their end, and their goal. But love remains. So we can understand too, at every wedding, what do you hear? If I don't have love, nothing more than a gong, a cymbal. Well, it's true. Charity has to imbue all of these. If any of these things are done outside of charity, then they really do become empty. So anyway, these are the three theological virtues. Now, the cardinal virtues, called cardinal because they're the hinge which other things hold on. These are various moral and intellectual virtues, but these are achievable by us. We can relate to these much more. These we could find in common with those who, because of natural law, or have that natural revelation of God. Prudence really is, if you want to define it, it'd be right action applied to a situation. Like, what do I do? Now, this is called the mother of all virtues because without it, we're not going to really achieve something that's good. This one's not easy. Now, prudence isn't being careful, which is sometimes you might hear it being used at. This simply is practical wisdom. What do I do here? Now, we'll talk more about this with forming the conscience next week, but we can spend a lot of time on virtue theory. There's no sense to go deep. There are various parts to virtue. There's subjective parts. There's quasi-virtue parts, what they call integral parts. And there's potential parts. But three parts of prudence, I believe potential, are worth talking about. It's called counsel, judgment, and command. This is how we work through stuff. When you're trying to decide, what do I do? Now think if you're in a situation where you might be tempted. I'm not quite sure what to do. In other words, let's use something that would be very, very simple. If I go to that party, and it's likely I'm underage, it's likely there's going to be drinking, I'm not certain the parents are going to be home. Now, my desire is that I want to go. But my reason now is trying to mitigate that. Say, think about this. So a person's going to start trying to work this out in their mind. And you should seek counsel outside of yourself. You start by asking your friends, but you best ask somebody who has a little bit more standing. The saying goes, if you don't know what the prudent thing is to do, go and ask a prudent person. In other words, look for sage advice. What do you think? Well, you're putting me in the near occasion of sin. Well, probably. But you don't really know that their parents aren't going to be home. And just because they have beer there doesn't mean you're going to be drinking it. Well, is that prudent advice? What's my weakness like? Will the parents be home? That might change the situation. So you're gathering facts and you're counseling, and oftentimes you're spending a lot of time at this stage. And then you come to the point where you're making a judgment. This is what I've concluded. Now the command follows immediately. Nobody's going to make a judgment and sit on it, right? That would be foolish. So you're working through this. This really is the formation of conscience. So when we talk about conscience next week, we'll talk about it as working through the parts of prudence. So we'll know that conscience is not something that simply determines an act good or bad, but it's one by which we recognize something that is good or bad. So anyway, deliberation, the counsel, and then judgment and command. Now, there's also vices attached to these, right? Not attached, but that stem from them. And this is kind of interesting, because I always want to point out where concrete ways where we get fooled. There's what they call false resemblances of prudence, right? One is craftiness. Okay, this is really guile and fraud. So you might think, like when you might use the term clever. Like, weren't they clever? You know, and it has a resemblance to prudence, but it really has a different goal and different aim. So it's a false understanding of it. The second is carnal prudence. In other words, we might understand this in terms of success. That person is so successful, that they're so savvy with business. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but they can be savvy to a fault. In other words, this can be entrapping us, and it can be a false semblance of prudence. So this false prudence, this craftiness, these are all things that we have to ferret out and really work through counsel and try to determine, is this really something that's a moral object, that is something that I can be proud of? Are my intentions good? You know, if I'm doing something good, am I doing it for the wrong reason? You can be a person who spends most of your day doing charitable works. And by that I mean you could be working in a soup kitchen and everything else, and you might just be very glad that everybody knows it. And you can undo your own gift, if you want to call it that way, okay? Anyway, so that's prudence. Now with justice is one of those things that on the surface we just think we know what it is. But it's not giving somebody what is theirs, it's giving another person what is their due. Plato worked this out in his dialogues, you know. If you have a weapon and it's mine, I'd like you to return it, and I'm going to harm you with it. Well, justice doesn't demand that I give it to you. That would be giving somebody what's theirs. It's mine, you know. Now, we have a real innate sense of justice, especially the young. They can ferret out what's not fair very, very easily. You know? Yeah, firstborn, how about it, you know? Except for the middle one, they go along with everything, right? That's what my wife says, she was in the middle. So, Aquinas now, he places the virtue of religion. Now there's all, you know, again, I'm not going to explain all the parts, but religion falls underneath justice, because religion is that thing which we should give God, to give God what is his due. So worship and these things all fall under that. The vice is opposed to justice. Now, here we go. We're all going to be a little guilty here on something. One, and again, we're thinking if you give somebody what's their due, then to not give them what is due them becomes the injustice to them. So the vice opposed to justice, one would be tale-bearing. We would normally know that as gossip. You're saying something that's not true. You know, even if you might think it's true, or you heard the rumor, and you have no problem spreading it, right? So we really struggle with this, and I heard one story, I'm sure it's made up, but it's a good illustration of a medieval woman who went to the priest and, you know, confessed the sin of spreading tale-bearing gossip. And the priest said, well, for your penance, take this chicken and walk through the village, plucking feathers as you go, thinking of what you've done and said, and then return to me. And the woman did, returned to the priest, and the priest said, now continue your penance, go back and grab all the feathers that you plucked. Well, they're all over the place, right? The wind took them. He said, well, see, that's how your words were. You can't grab those things back. This was, you know, this is what you'll suffer now. So tale-bearing is one of those things. Another one would be calumny. Now, the difference with calumny is that's telling somebody else not a lie, but a truth, but one that they don't really, shouldn't have to be privy to. You know, you don't need to tell somebody, did you know his dad's an alcoholic? Well, it's true, I'm not lying. You know, we will talk like that. But they should not have access to that information. So that's another way that a vice that's opposed to justice.
Can you pronounce that word again?
Calumny, Calumny. Calumny.
We're called TMI.
What's that?
We're called TMI.
TMI?
Too much information.
Oh, okay, very good. A third one, and there again, there's many, would be derision. Derision is simply when we're just ridiculing other people and bringing shame. And we always do this to help boost our own self-esteem, do we not? But these are all things that move against justice. Now, we'll talk about social justice another time and those things in our economy and trade and such. Okay, the third cardinal virtue is fortitude. Now, fortitude allows us to overcome a fear and remain steady. So this helps us remain steady in the face of obstacles. So this too is a gift of the Holy Spirit, along with obviously being one of the my mind's going with, I'm thinking temperance.
Cardinal.
One of the cardinal, thank you very much. What falls underneath this? Well, there are parts with this, potential parts. Patience and perseverance. In order to really be strong, oftentimes we have to be patient. And I can't think of who it was that said it. Can you always get away with saying Benjamin Franklin? He quotes that, he's quoted everything. But the root of all sin is impatience. Now, it's because if we struggle, if we want something and we don't want to work for it, we might steal because we're not patient with our own abilities and with time to acquire something. Young people might have premarital sex because they're not patient enough to wait for the proper time and the proper environment and the proper structure to protect that love that they're trying to express. So patience falls under this, as does perseverance. Sometimes we just have to, stick with it. Now, if we had more time, I would explain to you how Aristotle, when he talks about these, he talks about in terms of in the middle, in medio stat virtu, virtue stands in the middle. So on one end, you'll have an excess, and the other one, you'll have a deficiency, right? So if we look at somebody who's strong, there's false resemblances of this too, right? So a person who's rash, they run into the middle of an oncoming army, screaming, and they're shot dead immediately. And somebody might say, what a brave, strong person. No, that was rash. It was not a proper expression of fortitude. Neither would be the person who would run in the other direction, the coward. So we're looking for that balance between the two. And again, this is what requires prudence, right? It requires love of the other person, so charity's there. We're also talking about prudence, and we might be fighting for justice. All these things are interconnected somehow, some way. But nonetheless, so we could be talking about mock courage too, right? A lot of times if we're angry or depressed, we might appear that we have a certain amount of courage, but it's sort of like a mock understanding of it. It's not something true. Or there could be motivations, intentions that could be good, or even if they are good, they might not really be fortitude. Think of like a bounty hunter or somebody who's going after another person. They're not truly courageous people. They're just motivated by the bounty that they would achieve, okay? Not that being a bounty hunter is bad, but it just might be a mock understanding of fortitude, okay? I'm thinking like the people who go and repo people, there you go. All right, repo people, okay. Now, last but not least, when we talk about temperance, temperance really is, they have it here, restraint of our desires and passions. I'm going to say it's a properly ordered love of self. So it's a proper understanding of the love that we have for ourselves. Now, this regulates all the biological aspects of our lives, food and drink and sex. This is the one that, again, Dante had those people who struggle with this in the upper parts of hell. Again, if it was a mortal sin, he's not saying it's not a damnable offense, but this one, in some way, we get it. A person understands an expression of love in the sexual act. They're doing it at the wrong and inappropriate time. Their object will be fornication. Even, and this is the irony. And I'll tell the young people, what does people usually say to each other if they're not married and making love? I love you, I love you. But that's not really what you're doing. If love is to will the good of the other, then how are you willing them good when you're causing them to sin mortally? You really, if you want to be intellectually honest, you should say, I'm having pleasure at your expense, but that just kills the moment, you know? So, I can make eye contact with you now, and you can smile. So, anyway, so these things regulate our biological aspects, okay? Now, they're perversions of a necessary good. We need food. And you know, this is the sad irony, too. This is why I think God is very understanding and gives us the grace. He could have made sex unpleasurable. He could have made food unpleasurable. He could have made food taste like wax, and nobody really be tempted with it. But it's a delicacy that we enjoy. So we struggle finding the balance. The same thing with sexual intercourse, okay? But there are ways we could even break up temperance when it comes to sexual acts. We could talk about natural and unnatural. And the natural, at least, would be better in a sense than the unnatural. A natural sexual act would be either conjugal love or adultery, okay? Now, I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that's still a natural act. The unnatural acts would be homosexual sex or masturbation. So the irony is that, you know, some people think that the Catholic Church focuses so dearly on this, and it's the worst of all things. They understand it correctly. It's a natural good that's being perverted. It mimics some things, and that before anybody thinks that we're making fun or mocking a homosexual person, which is always how we understand it, understand that it's no, not, I don't want to say it's no different, but it falls in the same category as masturbation. And nobody really says that we harp on these, even though we will call it an evil, something illicit. So these are the things that regulate us. And again, it could have been that these things weren't pleasurable, but they are. They're necessary for our human life. And I think God understands not to dismiss any of it, not to diminish it, but I think He understands the temptation that is here. So this is something that I think we genuinely have to be on guard against. But you can see if we were to focus, like some people might think we do, focus on, you know, sexuality, you know, where the, you know, Catholic Church is the sex police saying who or cannot. You see how far down it works from all these other things. The sins against these things are greater and higher sins. So we have to be on guard, and just because this is very clear and easy for us to identify, that doesn't make it, we're not saying it's right. Some of these things that are a little bit more nuanced, we might be falling into a trap that is much deeper than we think. So we have to keep that in mind, okay? Now, there are false, I want to say vices that work against temperance too. One would be insensibility, you know, to reject pleasure. That's not our way. You go to a Catholic wedding, you understand, we like pleasure. It's a celebration. Anybody watch Babette's Feast?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Yes, Pope Francis is one of his favorite movies, I understand. Okay, well, in a nutshell, Babette was a refugee from France. She was a great chef, and she came into this small Christian sect where the father, the minister, had died, and his two unmarried daughters had tried to keep it going, and they took her in as the cook. So she went from cooking this wonderful food to just, you know, I guess, you know, ale bread, and can't remember exactly what else it was, but very plain food. And then she wins the lottery back in France, has 10,000 francs, is obviously before the euro, and spends it all on a great feast for them. So they determine, I'm giving it to you really in a nutshell, that, you know, since we don't like anything ostentatious, we will eat it, but we will all act as though we're not having any pleasure from this, you know. Well, that's not our understanding, you know. There's times for feasting. So a vice that works against temperance, one would be insensibility, to simply, you know, reject the pleasure. The other one, though, would be intemperance, right? Gluttony, all those things. Anything that. It's interesting too how Dante deals with this. Again, with this, how he takes the person in hell and the gluttonous, because they had no way to really regulate this. They mired almost in their own type of like pool of filth. They'll be half in frozen ice and everything, and they become garbage themselves and such. because they had no way to regulate this on the outside. They took a good, and this is how even Dante expresses it, it's a good given to them. They took it and did not properly appreciate it. But instead, there's something that's known in theology we call first things. If you don't understand the first thing, and you go after the second thing, sometimes you never really get to appreciate the first thing. For instance, alcohol. It's not an evil, right? Alcohol is meant to bring joy to the heart. It's a sign of celebration. This is why it's a natural sign used in the Eucharist. It's a sign of celebration, it's a sign of inebriation, and we use those natural signs to understand what it does on a spiritual level. But a person who becomes an alcoholic can never appreciate that. They're over here with it. They've lost its first instance, what it really is supposed to do. So they have never really appreciated the gift that was given to them. Well, this is like that in temperance, right? So we get to the point where if we do become gluttonous, or we're used to, rich foods and lavish, we never can really appreciate what it means in the first place. Nonetheless, let's see. Okay, that's what I got on that. Now, let's see if we can't do a few of these questions. How about we do the second one on the second part first? That one, let's see if we can't get some discussion going. It says, in Western society, it is admirable to take care of one's physical health. It requires discipline, and in each city and town one can find gyms and fitness centers. Is that wrong? Why or why not? And what do you think our stress on physical fitness means when compared to our moral fitness? What might be a good balance, and if choices must be made due to time constraints, in other words, you can't do it all. What would fit our Catholic understanding of the human person best? So, what do you think about that? I mean, we see a lot of gyms out there, right? We don't see a lot of, virtue centers. Even though we might call our churches that. What's your impression on that? I mean, we have an explosion of XP90, XP30. You can get fit abs in 20 minutes a day. What do you think about that stuff? Anybody?
Well, it's that whole thing with temperance versus the others, it's very concrete, it's very easy to grasp, we get it, we understand it, it's not as abstract as the others. And so we can't wrap our minds around, we can't wrap ourselves around the others.
We like controlling what's easy.
Yes.
Yeah, so good, the psychological element involved there. What else, anything?
I think it goes back to what your intention is and why you're doing it. Are you doing it so you can have longevity? Are you doing it because you're trying to keep yourself clear and keep yourself in good health? Or are you doing it so other people appreciate your external appearance? Are you doing it to keep up with what other people think you should look like? And I think that's where it sort of gets lost in our culture.
That's a very good point, and I think too, we would, even if you had the best of intentions, we probably would even struggle with ulterior motives. Are we really, we probably have to go back and work through prudence and really, is that really why we do it? Like if I had a gym in my home, how do I dress there compared to if I had a gym somewhere else? I'd have 3 sweatshirts on if I went somewhere else, but, some people, they have gym clothes, So that's interesting. But, we're custodians, right, of our own bodies, so we should take care of it. But, I don't know what you want, tell me what you think about this. Now, let's not worry about a lot of the extreme self-mortification that we might have read of some of the saints. Let's just put that aside so that they become an issue. But what about the saints, who have died young? They weren't so much concerned with longevity. St. Francis is, what was he, 30, in his 30s, I'm sure. I can't remember exactly what it was. But a lot of saints that probably could have, let's forget about even saints. Look at even our secular heroes, Martin Luther King Jr. He put himself in harm's way. Could we say that had he not wanted to be outspoken and work for a cause, that perhaps he could have lived an old life in a rocking chair with somebody? So how do we find a balance between those things?
Well, bottom. I'm sorry, go on.
No.
No.
Ladies first, he says.
Well, you said earlier, Christians need to be radical to defend their beliefs. Martin Luther King Jr. needed to be radical to do what was right for him and for, all of
For our country,
Yeah.
sure.
So, I mean, I don't know that, I don't know that that's a moral question necessarily.
Well, maybe this comes into it, you know. I mean, he did. I mean, you know, I didn't talk about it, but when I do natural law with the students, I bring up his letter from Birmingham Prison. Martin Luther King Jr. was trained at Boston University, which is a Catholic university, and he brings up the question in his letter as to, I'm trying to say that we have to be law-abiding, but yet I broke the law and now I'm in prison. You might be wondering why. He says, well, some laws are not laws, and he goes on to explain why. So, yeah, very good.
Yeah, what I was gonna say is that, in order to serve God fully, you have to dwell deep within inside to recognize not only your gifts, but also your weaknesses, okay? Teresa, I think the little flower said, you should embrace your weakness, embrace your faults, because it's that dance between, you know, the good and the bad that goes on all the time, but it's in the weakness that Christ actually steps in and does his most miraculous work.
Yeah, that really brings us up the contingency. We
Right.
fully accept that.
So the bottom line is the base, I'll come back to the point you made before about Satan, but the thing is, hey, one of my gifts is that I have gifts of intellect, I have gifts of physical gifts, I have specific charisms. I gotta utilize them. If I'm gonna be an evangelist, I gotta be a healthy evangelist. I'm not living back where I was working in the fields or I'm a Dominican walking from town to town and get my work out that way. I gotta take care of myself physically so I can continue to do God's work of saving souls here on earth as long as I can.
Yeah.
All right? And if that's my motivation, which is to serve God, then that's the right thing. If I get in there, oh, I'm starting to look good in that, that's Satan playing with you. And then you have to say, no, look, I'm gonna work out. God, if I feel good about it, great. You know, you work out that second stuff later. That's Satan trying to get me to not work out, which is the bad side. I used to take like sandwiches and clothes and blankets to people on the streets of New York. And then I used to play with my mind saying, well, you know, maybe I'm doing this selfishly because this makes me feel good. You know, but I'm saying, wait a minute, if I stop doing this because it's making me feel good, then those people won't get those blankets I'm gonna take out tonight. So I thank God if I feel good, and, you know, and if I gotta work all that stuff out in a higher level of spirituality someday, God will help me with it, you know, and just do your work, you know? Does that make sense what I'm saying to you?
I think so. I mean, you know, we all struggle with that, our ulterior motives, and there are philosophers out there who believe that being an absolute gift is impossible, or not impossible, but that, well, he's over here, Christ was the only absolute gift.
Right.
Because we always have some motive to go in there. Now, my way of resolving that is, as Catholics, at the altar, what is it that happens in liturgy? My gift and yours. I mean, we often forget that that's our participation, right? In the liturgy is, that's my gift up there, it's my sacrifices. So united with his, even with the ulterior motives, it becomes pure, which is how I would understand it,
Right.
you know? But yeah, we struggle with this, but you're right, other than that. You know, I guess, I can't think of, I know his brother is the mayor of Chicago. He wrote an article recently, and he got misquoted. He said how he doesn't want to live past 70. That was what the article got misquoted. That's not what he meant. What he was saying is that at some point, he doesn't see any reason to go at the extraordinary means to save you, which wouldn't be against Catholic understanding. But the point is, he talked in there, he quoted and coined this term, the American immortals, that we have gotten this in our head that somehow we can just live forever, even, you know, we should all hit 100. So we would struggle with that, like a person who's, you know, maybe doing calisthenics, trying to take care of themselves, you know, how do we balance that with an industry that's so obsessed with beauty and the exterior, that the fact that you want to take care of yourself doesn't negate any of that, but these are all the struggles, you know, these false resemblances of some of these virtues that get thrown in there. And I guess they're great to bring up because that's concretely what we have to work out, because again, even though adultery, fornication are the easy ones for us to identify, This is the stuff that's really hitting us every day. I'm not affected every day by adultery. I'm not. So it's not a struggle I have. But all these other ones are. So I will not, it's something I will focus on, it's something I'm diminishing on any level, but I'm not gonna be fooled into all these other things that are hard. But I guess pastorally, not that I'm a pastor, but pastorally, if you're working this stuff out in thought like that, in, the stages of prudence, it's a good thing. I mean, at some point, this is where we're at. If we're working that stuff out, it says something. It's, the difference between thinking something through and, in other words, I think God engages us in like this. My mother's, little Italian lady who will yell at her guardian angel, and I'm old, that rug was there, you get it bunched up, you're supposed to watch after me, I could have hurt myself. Well, that's not naive, it's a very simple, pure faith. I tell her to make sure the windows are closed when she's doing this, so people don't think she's nuts, but other than that. So, I think we have to engage God, and I think that's what He likes. So, I tell the kids, if you're struggling, give it to Him, tell me you want more grace. I can't do this, I need more grace. He'll match that, be prepared. But I said, don't we prefer that in our own relationships than somebody who's indifferent to us? I mean, everybody hates the person that I'm done with you, Yes, sister.
The first part of this thing about the gym, it's one thing to take care of your body, your health, and make sure it's working right. The other thing, going to a gym, and if you are in a select group of people, a certain class of people that have ways to go into a
Means.
gym.
Yeah.
You're meeting other people on a certain social level, okay, and we can stay at those social levels. But the second part of this, that our Christian understanding of the human person, that's when you get out of your social level a little bit and meet other human beings in different systems. And I can give you an example of, I was in Mississippi for a while, and back in 92, 93, and there was going to be a march for Martin Luther King in the little town. It was a real little town that I was in. And anyway, I said to my white Catholic community, I didn't say it to them, but I said to a good friend of mine in that community, what do you think about going for this march? And don't, you'll have a cross burnt on your lawn. And I said, oh, don't worry. But anyway, I had such a wonderful experience in the Black community in West Philadelphia. I feel really bound to them. But anyway, I went. Now this will blow your mind. 92, it was just the Black community. There was no whites anywhere. Not a police, no mayor, not a white person anywhere to be seen. And the Black community came in from all of the suburbs and all around. It was packed, town was packed, the streets were crowded. We got to the middle of town and they played Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream.
Yeah.
I thought I was back in the 60s. And we're walking down to their church and they invite me to come in for refreshment. Would you come? And I said, certainly. And I had to walk back across town, and I think they were afraid for me to do that. A couple cars stopped at the corner and offered me a ride back. I brought it up later, much later, to a prayer group, Bible study group. And there was a cold reaction. It's, we don't understand ourselves and other human beings if we go out of our comfort zone. To go to a gym, you exercise something to take care of yourself, but are you out of your comfort zone, so to speak?
Yeah, I guess in a lot of ways too, you have to watch it's not an end in itself.
Yeah.
Because I often hear, not exactly what you're saying, but I often hear people saying, I'm taking care of myself, so then when I retire, I'll have more time to devote to certain charities.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that's probably true to a certain point, but and this is just me speaking for myself, I'm not really talking for anybody else, because this stuff has to be worked out, but You know, I remember being quite young at one time thinking, well, it'd be nice if I make more money so I can be more charitable. Well, that day never comes. That's like saying, I can't wait to make enough money to have children. Well, that day will never come if that's what you're waiting for. So, you know, we have to watch. It's difficult. It's difficult. One last thing before we go. How about the very first question off the first session? Because I think this is kind of important. Is a person who's unaware of the moral law bound by the moral law? And in what circumstances, if any, would such a person be guilty of sin? So think of somebody, in other words, this is about ethics if you're not Christian. What does a Muslim do, or an atheist, or atheist? You know, in other words, we have to watch just saying that the person should be good. Because I have friends who are atheists, and they teach their children not to lie. They teach them to work hard, you know, be honest. So if we break Christianity down to those things, then there's not a big distinction between us. But nonetheless, they don't have divine revelation. So what about that? They're not aware of the moral law. What circumstances do you think? Is that too vague a question? See, if it is, that's not my question. That came from the book, so I
No.
can slough that one off.
It's not vague, and I think it's really difficult to answer.
Difficult to answer.
Like, my instinct would say, no, they're not necessarily bound by moral law by Catholic or Christian standards, but the sins that are Christianly defined, that would coincide with street morals,
Okay.
maybe you would violate, of course, they're gonna be guilty of those particular sins, like lying and under oath, or murder, or, like, things that would be considered wrong by law, by
Okay, all right.
Is
legal
this-
law.
Is
Okay.
this like when you're teaching sixth grade, the mortal sin, and you're telling them these three things have to be in place if it's considered a mortal sin? Is this question kind of?
Well, sort of, although it would probably state that if a person, even without having a law revealed to them, murdered somebody else, they would still be guilty of breaking the law, even though, because this is what we're saying, that it's revealed to them in a natural way. So there are things here that they still, you could not know it, which might be an interesting way. We only have a minute or two left to twist this question a little bit, because I certainly believe that you don't have to be Christian to be ethical. But then if you're not, where do you draw your ethics from? Like, what's the source of your ethics? So is murder something that we've just mutually agreed to? In other words, it would be, I don't want to hurt you, and you don't hurt me, because it might affect my family. It's just not good. So how about we just make this agreement, and we'll call this our law? I mean, is that how it is, or do you think they're kind of like getting appendages from the Judeo-Christian system? Because certainly, like you said, I mean, my friends are atheists, they're not liars. Why not? You know, I often think that if I weren't Christian, I don't know that I'd have much restraint. I don't know that there'd be reason.
Well, another example for you to use is somebody who's mentally retarded,
Okay.
all right? So you're saying here's a person who's mentally retarded and they're unaware of a moral law, are they bound by that? For them, you know, for them to do something like slapping someone or hitting someone or hurting someone or stealing something, they're not aware that that's wrong.
Yeah, this is diminished, okay, so,
Right.
yeah, there's no culpability if the person doesn't know, which even our legal system understands that, right? I mean, you know, they don't try certain children as adults, and even if, you know, they differentiate different degrees of murder, was their intent, you know, was it premeditated? So, I mean, I think that they've even worked this out, you know. But we'll leave it as, is that, you know, there's still those things which we cannot not know.
And also, you can know that there is something that's wrong, but if you're forced against your will to do something, a girl that's forced by a pimp to prostitute herself, she knows it's wrong, but she is not freely making a decision. She is being forced to do something that's wrong.
Very good point. Did you see Pope Benedict, I guess he was in the Philippines recently, and he ripped up his talk when the little girl came to him and said that I think she was 13, and she, something about that age, how she was forced into prostitution, and, you know, why did this stuff happen to me? And the Pope just ripped up his talk, and he says, I have nothing to really answer to that. So, yes, I mean, this is where we don't judge, right? This is the new line with teenagers, don't judge me, you know? And everybody always knows that you shouldn't judge. Well, see, we would judge prostitution and those things, like you rightfully said, as an illicit moral object. But, you know, the other stuff, how this works out with this young girl, between her and God, you know, how would I act? I don't know. I don't think I'd be comfortable saying that I would act something different, you know? So that's not an easy
Because
one.
the fear of the pimp diminishes responsibility.
Well, absolutely, well, yeah, it absolutely does, you know, it's.
It's not full consent.
Yeah, metaphorically, it's a gun to the head, you know. You do this, well, there's no complacency, you know. Now, we'll end with this, that even in our own lives, those are extreme circumstances, right? And hopefully we'll never be in those situations. There are certain limits, thresholds that love needs to function, but there's no upper threshold. In other words, there's nothing wrong with you running out of a building that's on fire, because self-preservation is something that we do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's nothing to saying that I'll go above and beyond and put myself in harm's way. Not against fortitude, right? We're not being rash, but to save somebody. So I think this is how, maybe this sums it up, whether it's going to the gym or anything else, all those things are good, and you can exist comfortably in the virtue of charity and be on all those things, but maybe it'd be more charitable if we gave those things up. You know, not that you're gonna not take care of yourself. Maybe let's just give a scenario where, you know, the time and money that, because it's money to go to a gym. You're talking, you know, 30, 60 bucks a month. It's gonna take time. I'm gonna use that money and that time for something greater that has nothing to do with me. And if I live to be 60 instead of 75, then that's a good trade. I don't know. I mean, maybe nobody's life plays out like that specifically, but that would be, there's no upper limit. You know, there's nothing wrong with you going, no, it's you can do that. But if you were to give that all up, which is why we have saints, right? And if that's not true, if what I'm saying is not true, then martyrdom would be stupid. You know?
You know, about the pimp and the prostitute, I was in Laredo, Texas for a while, and on the front page, they put like 13 pictures of prostitutes that they picked up, faces, on the front page. I was so livid. I said, well, where are the pimps? Why aren't there pictures here? So, I had an ongoing discussion with the editor about that kind of behavior. I worked with women with a history of prostitution, but Sweden has put in a law where they go after the pimps, not after the prostitute, because they're the victims. She's the victim. They need to go after the male perpetrators on this.
Well,
So
you're right, they're forced.
Yeah.
I was listening to NPR on the way up here, and although they were speaking Swahili, I didn't know exactly what area after they were in. But they were saying these people who are such destitute and poverty, the women typically go into prostitution, but the males go into violence. So really, they're just two expressions of the same thing. One might rob, kill. Women typically don't. They would use their bodies to achieve the money for drugs or whatever it is they're doing. But it's
Even to survive.
correct. That's right. Well,
Right.
yeah, because they were saying in this article, and not this article, but this session, that this is how they live. I mean, they need money to live. And it was interesting. The one girl, talk about what we're just talking about. This is it. She voluntarily decided to get out of prostitution and no longer go in, even have a job, because she's afraid if she made money, she might go and buy drugs. The reason why this session was on tonight was that the man, and it's interesting you brought that about the women, in that culture, they'll accept reconciliation of the men who've created violence, but not the women, because that shame cannot be brought back on the family. So this man they brought the 12-step program into the area. The man says, no, I'll have homes just for the girls who've been in prostitution, because their families won't take them back even after reconciliation. So, yeah. All right. Well, we got a little discussion in there. Very good, guys. All right. Well, back to the quick prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, all the things that we share with each other tonight, anything that we said, let it only be for your will and not for our own betterment. So be with us. Give us a good night rest. Bring us peace into our hearts. And may we always bring love into the world. We ask you to bless us in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Next week, we'll try just to do more of that. We'll leave this here, let them wonder what that is tomorrow.
Notebooks for us, so that's something that we're making.
And did they have that picture?
No, they found Amazon teachers who like had Facebook, or they would go on and my pictures, that was my cover picture for some time, yeah. So then they assume the future could be all for and then they copy it like emails to kids.
I had Elena Saylor bring this down for me.
You had what?
Elena Saylor. I said, go over and Mr. Killian room and get his cross. She's like, it's burning. I'm like, she also brought that plan up, so I'll get my, I'll get her tomorrow, put it back.
That's funny. Good job.
Just another day Another day living a dream.
John Paul II.
Very primitive things.
Not one woman or not, then not okay.
I can see that, but I'm not impressed.
She must have had 3 or 4 years. Nothing.
Yeah.
She really has
One beer sometimes.
Oh, I think so. Leave her alone. She's 21 on drinking. I was doing that one. Leave her alone. She's in the house, for God's sake.
And then if she has to wake up and go to work, then she learns.
Yeah, do that, or she's playing with this stinking chinchilla or whatever.
Chuck the chinchilla.
She tied, she's getting a bigger cage.
Should we get clothes for him or something?
Yeah, yeah. She made a problem, what, she spent $10 on a Christmas tree for that stupid thing. She had a Christmas tree there, she was playing music, when she leaves for work, she brings it out in the window and puts it next to the TV with my wife, who likes to watch movies. And you know what? The stupid thing comes over to the cage and looks at the TV. I mean, that's what bothers me. It's like, I wonder if it isn't true, you know, that the thing likes to watch the movies. It sits there like this, you know. But
It's so funny. Christy is so funny. She's like, even if she's upset about something, she's still like,
Fun and shiny, yeah.
yeah, she texted me the one day, she goes, oh my god, I almost died. I'm like, what happened? And she was telling me something about the gym and some guy was like talking to her. at the
oh,
gym.
yeah. She's doing pretty good. She's been going pretty regularly.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, I'm glad for her.
Well, no, it's healthy, it's good for you. If, you know, it's healthy, the Greeks always said healthy body, healthy mind. You know.
Yes, and gosh, we were teaching PPE.
Oh,
It was so like.
that's a
I was
wonderful
falling.
experience, right?
Downtown? Yeah. You haven't been in there?
What type of
I think I know better how to try to manage that. Things like this takes a little bit of time to play with. At least you didn't get called out.
Yeah, anyways. She said that whatever pain she was having earlier went away now, so she's disappointed.
And this is not your first, right? You
No,
had
this is our second, but our first was 4 weeks early, 4.5 weeks early, and she